me if this has ever happened to you. You wake up one day and you're not feeling well, so you decide to go on the internet and do a little research to see if you can figure out what's wrong. And before you know it, you're down the rabbit hole, where symptoms that didn't seem so serious at the beginning take on a life of their own. Now, this has happened long before the internet, especially with students. My med school buddies that I used to go on rounds with when I was an intern at the VA in Chicago knew exactly what I was talking about. They even had a name for it, intern syndrome. It was a kind of temporary hypochondria when students start worrying and even believing they're having some of the symptoms of the diseases they're studying. Trust me, this happens to us psychology students as well. We start learning about various mental illnesses, and bam, we start to worry that maybe we aren't so normal after all. I've been a little bit down. Am I clinically depressed? Is this the normal stress of graduate school, or do I have an anxiety disorder? And we're off and running. In a strange way, this is what happened in our case today. At some point, 19-year-old Nunez Burgess has some of these same worries, except she wasn't worried that she might have a mood disorder or panic disorder. She thought she might be a psychopath. Now, we don't know exactly why or when she started thinking this, but what we do know is that instead of going to see a mental health professional to maybe get a proper diagnosis, she decided she would do a little self-diagnosing. She devised her very own psychological test, one that involved murder. Welcome to Unmasking a Murder, a show about the psychology of crime. I'm Dr. Joni Johnston, a clinical and forensic psychologist, private investigator, and your host for today's show and every other show. I have to tell you that I spend a lot of time in prisons and forensic hospitals talking to people who've committed violent crimes. I've heard hundreds of reasons why, but I have never heard the story that you're about to hear. So we are going today to Guyana, Brazil, and please let me apologize in advance to anybody who speaks Portuguese or is from Brazil for my incredibly poor pronunciations. I've looked them up so many times, so any errors are 100% my responsibility. So Guyana is located in the central west part of the country. It's about 120 miles from Brasilia, which is Brazil's capital. It's a big city. It has about 1.5 million residents, and it's the 12th largest in Brazil. Of the 13 metropolitan cities, it has the lowest number of favelas, or what they call slums. Although, of course, there are poor people in any big city or any city at all. But even in these low-income areas in this city, the houses generally have electricity and trash pickup and running water. It's also described as a safe city in comparison to some of the other metro cities. So I think it sounds like a really nice city to live in. And if you look at some of the pictures on the internet, it's just a beautiful place. Now, among this 1.5 million residents was 18-year-old Ariane Barbara de Oliveira and her mother, hairdresser Eliane Laureano. Ariane was an only child, and Eliane was a single mom. And from everything that I've heard, everything that I've read, they had a very close relationship. Now, Eliane was only 35, and in some of the pictures, I tell you, they look like sisters. You have to kind of hold it up and go, which one is the child and which one is the mom? Eliane described her daughter Ariane as a sweet, innocent, loving child. She loved to dance. She loved her dog Jack, and she really loved all animals. And as a matter of fact, she dreamed of becoming a veterinarian when she got older. She had also been spending over the past half year a lot more time at a local skate park. Like a lot of countries, a lot of schools, her school had been closed due to COVID. So she had kind of gravitated toward this newer friend group. She still had her school friends, but she was hanging around a lot more with these new friends. And in particular, she had met a 16-year-old girl. She had spent the night with her a couple times. And this 16-year-old, who's not named in any news sources, I think because of her age, had introduced her again to some older people. She had actually spent the night with a 16-year-old at least on 2 occasions. And Ariane's mom was pretty protective mom. She was on top of it. She had met this 16-year-old. She had met her family. She had vetted her essentially to make sure her daughter was, not hanging around with the wrong crowd. Now, Ariane had also met 22-year-old Jefferson Calavante Rodriguez, 19-year-old Raisa Nunez Borges, and 18-year-old Enzo Jacomini Carniero Matos, who identified as transgender and really went by the name of Freya. She had met them, as I said earlier, in the middle of 2020, so around March of this time. And her mom had gone to the skateboard park, not just to watch her daughter skateboard, but again, also to check out her friends. So she knew all of these people on site. Ariane was also a very responsible daughter. She kept her mom in the loop in terms of what she was doing. They talked daily, multiple times a day. And on August the 24th of 2021, Ariane left a message for her mom saying that her new friends were going to come pick her up, treat her to lunch, and then bring her back home. And in this Facebook, I guess, WhatsApp message she left her mom said she was smiling, she was happy. And she basically said, Mom, who could turn down this offer? They're going to pick me up, they're going to treat me to lunch, then they're going to bring me all the way back home. Her mom had gone to the bank to make a deposit, and Ariane said, please leave the gate open because I'm going to take the key. And so if you're going to go out, I'm going to have the one for the gate and you want to be able to get back in. She also told her mom where they were going and where they're going to pick her up. And I think she must have given her some kind of ballpark in terms of when they were going to be returning. So from what we know, they picked her up a little before 8 p.m., which I can't even imagine that's lunchtime, but apparently it is in Brazil for a lot of people. And when she wasn't back by 11:15, Eliane started getting worried. She began texting her daughter, where are you? Why haven't you responded to my text? When are you going to be home? And she got nothing back from her daughter. So she was disturbed by this, but she thought she's a teenager. And so she went to bed. And the next morning, though, when she saw that Ariane wasn't home and that she hadn't responded to any of her texts, she knew that this was not like her daughter to do something like that. So she went to police, who initially did not take her seriously. We've heard that a million different times, but Eliane was somebody who was not going to be deterred in finding her daughter. The very next day after Ariane didn't come home, her mom went to that skate park because she knew from her daughter's voicemail that she was going with these 4 friends that she had met from there. She already had made flyers with her daughter's picture on them and information about where she had last been seen and where they thought she was headed. So this again just tells you how on the ball her mom was and how determined she was and how organized in trying to find her daughter. So she shows up at this local skate park and she finds one of the people, Freya, and she says, hey, have you seen Ariane? And Freya said no. He had no idea where she was. And later, Eliane said, I was just so shocked at how indifferent he seemed. He was the last person or one of the last people that I knew of who had seen my daughter. And yet he just acted to the news of her disappearance like it was just no big deal. But she was much too upset at the time to sit down and really think through, could this mean that he knows something about her disappearance? She just thought he wasn't being a very good friend. Unfortunately, Ariane's body was found 7 days later in this upscale neighborhood called João. Locals had called the police about a bad smell coming from the woods, and that's what brought the police out. And of course, they went and looked and they discovered the remains of this young girl. This was August 31st. Eliane found out after police identified her daughter's body. And ironically, 2 of the first people to offer condolences were 2 of the people involved, the 16-year-old unnamed passenger and Enzo Matos. There have been a couple of cases in the US in which these teenagers murdered a young girl or a friend of theirs and then went to the mom's house and tried to help her and hugged her and consoled her. And you can only imagine the betrayal these parents felt finding out that the person who was trying to help them had actually done it. Now, the 4 suspects had no idea that Ariane had told her mom so much about their plans. And thanks to Ariane's voice message and her mom's diligence, the foursome who had picked her up were picked up by the police pretty quickly. They were identified as persons of interest. And police found surveillance footage around where Ariane's body was found that put this 4 near the place where Ariane was found. They also were able to see on the surveillance video the car that was used to what they later found out was to dispose of Ariana's body. And they tracked down the owner of this car to Jefferson. They went to Jefferson's house, they searched his house, and they found the clothes he wore that day, the day of the murder, as well as a bloody knife that was used to stab her. So this was not somebody who was a sophisticated criminal and really made any efforts to hide the evidence. It didn't take long, you can imagine, to have all four of these kids in custody in separate rooms. It didn't take long before the beans got spilled and the truth came out, including the tale of the psychopathy test. So here are the nuts and bolts of this confession. 19-year-old Raisa Nunez Borges decided at some point that she had a problem that she talked to her friends about. And she told them, I just don't have any feelings. I think I might be a psychopath, but how do I know? And in her thinking, which is unfathomable, she decided that here's my solution. I know I'm going to kill somebody and see how I feel afterwards. Can I go through with it? Will I be able to do it? And if I do, how am I going to feel afterward? Will I feel shocked? Will I feel proud? Will I feel nothing? So she talked to her friends. She told them, I need to take this psychopath test and I need your help to see if I'm a psychopath. I need your help in committing this murder. But you know what's interesting about this is the original news clippings pointed to Raisa as the originator of this psychopathy test and this murder plan. Now it looks like some of the attorneys are pointing the finger at the 16-year-old, and they're saying that, no, she's the one who manipulated the older people in the car, which I personally have a very hard time believing. And I wonder if, since the 16-year-old is a juvenile still, and the most she could get for this murder is 3 years, if the other three have kind of put their heads together and decided to throw the 16-year-old under the bus. But I digress. So together, all four of them came up with a short list of potential victims. And they ended up deciding on 18-year-old Ariana Barbara Laureana de Oliveira Ariana because of her small size. It was nothing personal. She just didn't look like somebody that they thought would put up much of a fight. I mean, this is so chilling to me on so many levels. I mean, she was a friend. They had spent all this time skateboarding and getting to know her. And those were the decision criteria. We're just going to pick somebody that we know that we think we can overcome. So the night of the murder, Borges and her co-conspirators came up with a plan to lure Ariana with the promise of this free lunch. Ariana, they decided would be in the back seat with Raisa, while the two other suspects would be in the front seat. The plan was for them to drive around for a little while, listening to music. This is something they did all the time, as do, I think, teenagers and young adults worldwide. But they decided that they needed some kind of attack signal. And this attack signal would be when the driver, who was Jefferson, played this pre-planned song about murder. And I looked up the song. The song was called I Love You Like an Alcoholic by the Taxpayers. And it has some dark lines like, it's our last kiss, I need you like a broken leg. And so this is kind of a dark song. And they thought this was somehow some symbolic trigger for them. And so at that point, one of the two front seat passengers would snap their fingers and Raisa would begin her attack on Ariana. So the other three, their role, in addition to help set this up, was basically just going to be to watch while this whole thing happened. However, it did not work out that way. It is very difficult to murder somebody, particularly if you're going to strangle them, which was the plan. And as small as Ariana was, apparently Raisa and the rest of her crew underestimated how strong she was and how strong her will to live was. And so when Rice started strangling Ariana, it wasn't working. Ariana was fighting back. And when it became clear that Raisa Borges was losing the struggle, her friends then jumped in to help her. And an autopsy later revealed that she had been stabbed at least 3 times in addition to being strangled. This just must have been horrible because I can only imagine how much time it took because he's trying to strangle her. There's this huge struggle. Jefferson jumps in the back and tries to strangle her too. Now they're stabbing her. So after the murder, Jefferson lines the trunk of the car with this black garbage bag and they put her in the trunk in this bag and then they dump her body at a local park. Interestingly enough, after this happened, not a single person who spoke to the media to date has indicated that they noticed the perpetrators acting any differently after the murder that they had beforehand. Just a few hours afterwards, the three went to a shopping mall where they had something to eat and went shopping. They even still had dried blood on their clothes. They also continued their daily social media posts, which of course they were very active on social media and often commenting and messaging to each other. And as previously mentioned, hours after the discovery of Ariana's body, 2 of them were sending these "I'm so sorry for your loss" messages to Ariana's mother, Eliane. So I mentioned a little while ago that there are these legal shenanigans that have been going on since this happened. And from what I can gather, Rais's attorney is now pointing the finger at the 16-year-old and essentially blaming her for being the mastermind behind this whole psychopathy test and murder plot. Jefferson's attorney has talked a lot about his client's remorse and the fact that he had a history of depression and that he'd been taking antidepressants at the time this happened. So I guess it seems like he is claiming some kind of mental health defense in this situation. In an interview, his attorney also seemed to imply that his client at the time of the murder couldn't tell fantasy from reality. But I don't see how you get from depression, which is relatively common, to delusions. And, saying that he didn't choose the music, that another person had the cell phone. So it's kind of an interesting, confusing defense. On the one hand, he was mentally ill, and on the other hand, other people were really doing all these things as well. And there's no evidence of either of these that we can see. The defense has also mentioned this television series called End of the World, in which 2 British teenagers, one believes he's a psychopath, and he sets up a plan to kill his friend. And so I think there's some attempt to say, oh, it's the media influence, the violent media influence to set the seed. So it looks like the defense is kind of all over the board. And obviously they haven't gone to trial, so we don't know what's going to happen. We do know that the 3 adults of legal age, so from 19 to 22, have been charged with aggravated homicide and concealment of a corpse. And these are obviously very, very, very serious crimes. Eliane, who's the mom, it's just been so heartbreaking to watch her interviews. And she said that she still can't go in her daughter's room, that she keeps the door closed all the time because when her daughter's door is closed, she can pretend that her daughter is sleeping. And that the hardest thing for her, and I think it would be so heartbreaking for me as a mom too, is knowing that her daughter was killed by people that she cared about and that she trusted. So this is a relatively recent crime. There's still a lot that we don't know. I have not met with any of the alleged perpetrators who were in Brazil, but I do think there are some obvious psychological issues that at least beg some discussion or some things that we can talk about. The obvious one is 19-year-old Raisa Nunez Burgess, her alleged motive, that she designed this murder to test whether or not she was a psychopath. Now, I am sure that many of you, like me, are skeptical of this story. And also, like me, you probably have a ton of questions. I mean, first of all, why does she think she's a psychopath? What does she think a psychopath is? Most individuals who meet the diagnostic criteria for psychopathy show disturbing behavior years before they are diagnosed, often as children. And youngsters who have psychopathic tendencies, such as a lack of remorse, a lack of guilt, a lack of empathy, often will go to great lengths to hide these tendencies because they often get a great deal of pleasure and power hiding behind this mask that they present to others. It kind of gives them an edge. They aren't sitting around talking about it with their friends and devising some test to see if they are. Now, on the other hand, it's not uncommon for teenagers to identify with and even romanticize these kind of anti-heroes, especially if they don't fit in with the good guys. And these are often kids who are trying to get away from emotional pain or some issue or problem. And they think, oh, it's cool. It's cool to be a bad person. It's cool to be to be somebody who doesn't care about anything. That way you don't get hurt. And how wonderful it is, they think, not to have to deal with these pesky emotions like empathy. Also, at an age when we're figuring out who we are, I think giving ourselves some kind of a label can simplify things. So we can look for role models. We can do the things that we think that type of person would do or that label would do. But if Raisa really wanted an accurate diagnosis, if she really wanted some insight to really figure out what was wrong with her, of course, there are plenty of mental health professionals who are available to give her one. So I'm not saying Raisa's behavior is normal. Murdering somebody in cold blood is not normal. We would all agree to that. And it certainly proves that she's dangerous and disturbed. But I don't think it proves that she's a psychopath. Most psychopaths don't kill. And most killers are not psychopaths. Now, whether she's a psychopath or not is not going to matter much in terms of a legal defense. Now, another question that you may be having, and I certainly had, is what about her friends who didn't consider themselves psychopaths, but still went along with her plan? Their motive is somewhat of a mystery. Now, in one of the social media posts after the murder, Jefferson Rodriguez makes the comment that he can't resist the charm of psychological disorders and problems. I'm thinking that some time behind bars is going to cure that. So that is our story for today. For those of you who watch this channel, you know that I like to talk about kind of a bigger picture when we cover a story. And I think one of the questions I get oftentimes is somebody will email me and they'll say, my boyfriend or my ex-boyfriend does A, B, and C, or did A, B, and C, or my ex-girlfriend did A, B, and C. Is this person a psychopath? And my response is always a couple of different things. Number one, as a professional, I can never diagnose somebody that I have not evaluated. I can't practically because I don't have a crystal ball, and I can't ethically because we are bound as psychologists really to only provide those kind of opinions for people that we have evaluated. But let's put that aside for a minute and say that you are trying to diagnose somebody who you have been in a relationship with, whether that's a boss or a relationship that is romantic or now very problematic. And one of the things I'm going to do is encourage any of us for getting focused on diagnosing somebody else, as tempting as it is. And I'll tell you why. First of all, diagnosing is complicated and it should be done by a trained professional. So for example, when somebody is talking about, is this person a psychopath? We would have to look back at their childhood and start tracing their behavior from an early age. We'd have to know their criminal history if they had one. We have to know, talk to their friends, their family, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very complicated diagnosis to make. The other thing, though, is that sometimes assigning a label to somebody that we're angry at or that has treated us poorly prevents us from dealing with some of the pain and the anger that's underneath. It keeps us focused on blaming that person, or in some respects, even worse, it can tempt us to slip into trying to fix that person, depending on what that diagnosis is, or the diagnosis that we've decided they have. And I've seen so many people who've diagnosed their partners and they end up making excuses for their bad behavior by blaming it on that person's childhood. I think in relationships, it's more helpful or more productive to be focused on how that person treats you and what that person does. If this is somebody who's taking advantage of you, lying to you, is dishonest, is manipulative, is not trustworthy, who in the hell cares what is causing that behavior? That person is not being a good partner. And so I think we need to just be aware of what are our personal deal killers in a relationship and what should they be? So for me, for example, if I'm dating somebody, of course, I've been married for 100 years, but before that, some of my deal killers were controlling behavior. If somebody was super jealous, if somebody was trying to isolate me from my friends or my family, or was that insecure, or tried telling me what to wear or what not to wear, or wanting to keep tabs on me or text me or whatever, that is all I need to know. I don't need to know, is it because they have narcissism or psychopathy, or if they're a garden variety jerk. It doesn't matter to me. Another kind of deal breaker is gaslighting. If somebody's telling you your feelings are crazy, or convincing you you're crazy when you try to stand up for yourself, or dismisses your feelings or your thoughts, or saying you're irrational or you're overly emotional, and for God's sake, if somebody is hitting you or psychologically abusing you, does it really matter? Why? Does it matter what that person's diagnosis might be? What does matter is that you get the emotional support and the physical support you need to get in a better relationship or get out of that relationship. Personality disorders like psychopathy are very complex, and they really should only be made by a professional after a very thorough examination, psychological testing, and supplemented by interviews with a lot of different people. It's always concerned me when somebody comes to me and said, I saw this therapist for a while and my therapist diagnosed my partner as a psychopath or a narcissist or something else. And the therapist never saw that other person. Maybe that partner, or and hopefully now ex-partner, did have that personality disorder. But again, if a therapist is diagnosing someone they've never seen, that is a concern to me. We don't need to diagnose our partner to evaluate that relationship. So that is it for today's case on the psychopath test and how that led to murder. Thank you so much, as always, for watching. Just a few things to mention before I leave. As I mentioned before, a few months ago, I published a book called Serial Killers, 101 Questions True Crime Fans Ask. I'd love you to check it out. I have a new newsletter on Substack called Mind Detectives. It is 100% free. And what I do is I send out a newsletter every week where we talk about forensic psychology and true crime. So you can go on Substack and either type in Joni E. Johnston or Mind Detectives and subscribe. I'd love for you to do that. I want to give a big shout out to my friend Duty Ron. I was on his channel a few weeks ago. He's an ex-police officer or retired police officer. He is wonderful. His show is great. We discussed the Brian Laundrie case, and he does a wonderful job. So please check it out. If you like this show, I would love for you to subscribe. I'd love for you to suggest a case. Thanks for all the support that you've all given me over the past several months. That's all for today. Stay safe, my friends, and keep your eyes and your ears open. If you see something, say something. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this senseless tragedy in this case. Until next time, when we unmask another murderer.